All right, so hi, I'm Harshad Sanghvi, formerly from Kenya, and I'm going to talk today about our Kenya programs from the 1979s, 80s onwards. The very first time I was engaged with Japaigo in Kenya was when I was a resident, and that was the year in which some faculty members had just been trained in laparoscopy, both for infertility diagnosis and for tubal ligation. And Dr. Goka, who was the very first person to be trained in laparoscopy, was my faculty member, faculty teacher. And I was his assistant, and things were just not going right because the training had to be now translated to work, and he used to yell at me quite seriously. But in any case, I got to learn laparoscopy from Dr. Ngoka eventually. And laparoscopy became a very large part of Chapaigo's legacy in Kenya and tubal ligations, but it was only done by specialists, not by general doctors. Some years later, as I graduated through my residency, Chapaigo had started the academic skills courses in Kenya. And these were designed to teach faculty members how to read the literature. Very fascinating courses. Really help faculty to become better teachers. I don't know why we don't do those courses anymore. But subsequently, Japaigo moved from laparoscopy to mini-lap tubal ligations. And it's very exciting because at that time, Japaigo did not have an office, a formal office in Kenya. In fact, Japaigo's offices were in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And the directors of Japaigo programs in Kenya were usually chairmen of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Again, in my opinion, a very nice development thinking in those days. Don't create separate structures, but go and work within institutions that are then strengthen them from within. So Japaigo used to run through his programs through the University of Nairobi. And at that time, we were doing mini laparotomy as interval procedures. And in one particular year, Japaigo had done probably about 60 pairs of participants, nurse and doctors, to do mini lap tubal ligations. And they'd done that for many years at that time. And the University of Nairobi proposed that we shift this entire program into pre-service training. And Japaigo supported the university to do mini-lab training in pre-service, really big.
The office today has over 100 people. How many people were working with you back then?
So there were about 3 people, right? So just about 3 people. But we used the faculty. We used people in the faculty to provide services. But the core staff was one administrator, and Yuan Maura, and she ran Japaigo program, for 15-20 years in Kenya, long before Japaigo had a physical office in Kenya, when the office was still very much in the department, only 2 or 3 people. So some exciting courses were developed at the time. So Kenya is also the place where all of our infection prevention manual, this huge manual that changed many of the practices around the world, was developed in Kenya, actually in Kisii. Developed by Noel McIntosh and Linda Tejan. But working at Kisii and understanding the challenges and getting the feedback and being tested out there. We also developed at that time our pre-service thinking through the work of mini laparotomy done by physicians, teams of doctors and midwives.
Can you describe for us, or can you share with us any other sort of innovations that were occurring in the Kenya office even back then?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, we began training in comprehensive family planning methods for faculty members. So I do remember that all of the faculty at the University of Nairobi in my department were trained by Japaigo. But turning that around immediately in the next few years, this is I think around 85, 87, we trained the entire faculty from Muhimbili Hospital in Uganda, and in Tanzania. So all of this faculty came in 2 batches to get their training. Prior to that, almost everybody came to the United States to be trained. We were probably one of 2 centers, Egypt and Kenya, were the 2 centers where Jhpiego did its training now off-site. And I get that sort of led to eventually Jhpiego making the overall decision that it didn't make sense for them to do training in the United States. And then from then on it shifted. Now, but Jhpiego was the pioneer. So all of the faculty in Tanzania came in 2 batches to Kenya, and they were trained in the department where the Jhpiego's offices were, and we trained them in clinical family planning. A very, very comprehensive course, very nicely done. There were some other things. So we trained people from Seychelles, for example, at that time, from Nigeria as well. I think some of the other really, really key things was Jhpiego's work. I think Jhpiego developed the very first family planning guidelines for Kenya. These were guidelines based on studies that we had done on medical barriers. And I still remember Jim Shelton in those days, working with us and with Jhpiego to help create those very, very old guidelines, the very, very first. I believe Kenya was one of the first countries, and maybe Zimbabwe was the other country, that had the very, very first modern guidelines for family planning in Africa. We had some significant work in Kenya in the area of reproductive health in general, adolescence. We were working at the time on contraception for adolescents. And Jhpiego also provided the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology training in post-abortion care. So these were things that were introduced. In fact, for post-abortion care, the very earliest work on Carmen cannula, this is a device that preceded the manual vacuum aspiration device. And Noel McIntosh, our president at that time, had some hand in inventing that particular device. And the very first place it was tested by IPAS was in Kenya. And then subsequently, Jhpiego and many different organizations got together and created the Global Post-Abortion Care Alliance and led that agenda for many, many years. But the earliest work on post-abortion care was done both in Kenya and in Nigeria. Those are some of those quite amazing things. So here's one last piece of really important, from my perspective, contribution that Jhpiego made. Now, I told you about the mini laparotomy training, and Jhpiego supported the University of Nairobi in doing this pre-service mini lap training at huge cost reductions from what was done as in-service training. And all of the savings that were made from those 3 years of this mini lab training, what we did is we collected all those things and built a building for the department, almost about 20 rooms, bought computers. At that time, I remember Noel telling me that my department, through Jhpiego support, had more computers in Nairobi than Jhpiego had back here in Baltimore. But that came out of that incredible shift from in-service training to pre-service training. And we were able to have so many efficiencies as a result of that, that we even had money left over to put up a whole building with Jhpiego. I think over the years, the Nairobi office, the Kenya office, have really led the way in many, many different areas. I believe those earliest days, laparoscopy, pre-service education, infection prevention, our competency-based approach to training, our better humanistic training approaches were sequentially tried out in Kenya and then introduced in many other parts of the world. I think I can remember probably only 2 or 3 countries around the world that probably had had more significant Jhpiego support. Perhaps Thailand, Egypt at that time, Cairo, those 2. But Kenya made a significant contribution to Jhpiego's start.